After you finish listening to the story, don't forget to leave a comment about what you would have done in the character's place. Now, let's dive into the story. Jenna had spent the last 5 years of her life in a bustling city far from home. She had built a life with James, her husband, in a small but comfortable apartment, and had carved out a career in marketing that paid the bills and kept her busy. But as much as she loved him and the life they had built, there was always something missing, an emptiness she couldn't quite name. It was the kind of feeling you couldn't explain until you returned to where it all started, the place where you had first fallen in love, where your youthful dreams had collided with reality. And so, here she was, standing in the old town square of her hometown. The familiar sights, an old brick cafe, the school she once attended, and the winding roads she had walked down countless times, hadn't changed much. Yet everything felt different, like a stranger had stepped into her own skin, uninvited. Jenna exhaled slowly as she adjusted her bag on her shoulder. She hadn't planned on coming back, but when the opportunity arose for a quick visit, something tugged at her. She knew deep down that this trip wasn't just about catching up with her parents or taking a break from her hectic life. No, it was about something else, something she hadn't realized until now. As she walked through the town, the memories began to resurface, those simple days of high school, of careless laughter and first loves. She remembered Max, her first crush. He had been the quiet, brooding type back then, the one with the mysterious aura that all the girls secretly adored. But Jenna had never dared to approach him. After all, she had been just another shy, awkward teenager. But somehow, Max had always been in the background of her mind, like an unfinished chapter she never bothered to revisit. Now, years later, the chance of meeting him felt like fate. And so, when she saw him at the local coffee shop, her heart skipped a beat. Max, standing tall with that same intense look in his eyes, looked like he'd barely aged. His rugged features and dark hair gave him an air of mystery that was still as magnetic as it had been when they were teenagers. "Jenna." His voice, deep and steady, cut through the noise of the cafe. She turned, locking eyes with him. It was as if time hadn't passed at all. "Max," she said, surprised at how natural it felt to say his name after all these years. The small smile he gave her felt like a secret, a silent acknowledgement of everything they had once shared. "I didn't expect to see you here," he said, stepping toward her. His gaze lingered a moment too long before he glanced around the cafe. "You still live around here?" "No," she replied, feeling a wave of nostalgia mixed with unease. "I live in the city now, but I thought I'd visit for a while. My parents still live here." She forced a smile, but inside, she felt something stirring, something she hadn't anticipated. "Wow," Max said with a chuckle. "I always thought you'd get out of here. You were always too good for this town." Jenna's heart fluttered at the compliment. He had always been the one person who saw her differently. And though she had built a life with James, something about Max's presence reignited a spark she thought had long since extinguished. They talked for a while, catching up on the years that had passed. Jenna learned that Max had never really left, that he'd returned to the town after a brief stint in another city, looking for something, anything, really, to fill the void. He ran a small graphic design business now, still living in the same house he had grown up in. There was a quiet sadness in his eyes when he spoke about the past, the way he mentioned his failed relationships as if they were just stepping stones on a much longer journey. As the conversation flowed, Jenna felt a pull to him, a magnetic force she couldn't ignore. The way he looked at her, as if seeing her for the first time in a long while, made her heart race. For the first time in years, Jenna realized how much she missed feeling desired. Max smiled, his eyes glinting with a playful edge. "How about we grab a drink later? Just like old times." Jenna hesitated for a moment. She thought of James, who would be waiting for her at home, probably already worrying that she'd be late. But there was something about Max's presence that made it difficult to resist. "Sure," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. That evening, the old bar down the street from her childhood home felt oddly familiar. It hadn't changed much since she had last been there, with its dim lighting and the hum of low conversation. Jenna was surprised to see how easily she slipped back into the rhythm of the town, as though she had never left. Max was already there when she arrived, leaning against the bar, looking as though he'd been waiting for her all night. His smile, though easy, held a certain intensity that caught her off guard. They ordered drinks and found a quiet corner to talk. The conversation flowed easily, though Jenna couldn't shake the feeling that there was more lurking beneath the surface. The tension between them was palpable, electric. It was as if all the unspoken words of their past were now coming to the surface, ready to spill over. As the night wore on, the drinks seemed to loosen something inside Jenna. She laughed more freely, her inhibitions melting away in the glow of the bar's warm lights. And when Max reached across the table to touch her hand, her pulse quickened. For a moment, she considered pulling back, thinking of James and the life she had built with him. But then she looked into Max's eyes again, and all of her doubts seemed to vanish. She could feel the chemistry between them, undeniable and overwhelming. "Jenna," Max whispered, leaning in closer, his breath warm against her ear. "I've always wondered what it would have been like if we'd been together." His words hung in the air, thick with meaning. Jenna's heart raced, her mind clouded with memories of their teenage years and the longing she had buried so deep inside. She hadn't expected this, hadn't expected to feel like a different version of herself in his presence. And yet, there it was, undeniable. Her body was screaming for her to kiss him, to give in to the temptation. But in the back of her mind, James' face appeared, his smile, his warmth. She pushed the thought aside. She was here, in this moment, with Max. Before she knew it, their lips met, and the world around them seemed to vanish. The years, the distance, the commitments, they all faded away as their kiss deepened. Jenna left the bar feeling lightheaded, as if her body had betrayed her. The night air was cool against her skin, but inside, she felt a turmoil she couldn't escape. She had kissed Maximum. She had crossed a line she never thought she would. And yet, she couldn't deny the pull she felt toward him, the same attraction she had experienced all those years ago, now reignited with even more intensity. As she walked the familiar streets of her hometown, the sound of her footsteps echoed in the quiet night. She kept replaying the kiss over and over in her mind. What had she done? Her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a text from James. "Hey, babe, hope you're having a good time. Let me know when you're on your way home. Miss you." Her heart sank. She quickly typed a response, trying to keep her tone casual, even though her mind was in chaos. "Just wrapping up with some old friends. Be home soon." She slipped the phone back into her pocket, feeling a pang of guilt. James had no idea. She had been with him for nearly a decade, building a life together, and here she was, betraying him. But the feeling with Max was so strong, so undeniable. The confusion she had felt for years, the emptiness she had tried to ignore, seemed to make sense in his presence. She arrived back at her parents' house a little later than planned, the familiar creak of the door signaling her return. Her mother was in the kitchen, preparing a late-night snack, and greeted her with a warm smile. "Jenna, you're back late," her mother said, raising an eyebrow. "Everything okay?" Jenna forced a smile, her insides twisting. "Yeah, just catching up with some old friends." Her mother gave her a knowing look. "I hope you're not keeping things from James. He's a good man." Jenna's heart skipped. She didn't say anything in response, she didn't know how to explain what had just happened. How could she tell her mother that the life she had built felt like a lie, that she was questioning everything? She just nodded, stepping past her mother and into the guest room where she would sleep for the night. The next morning, Jenna's head felt heavy. She couldn't focus on anything, her thoughts were consumed by the events of the night before. She stared at her phone, the text from James still there, as if mocking her. He had no idea what was brewing inside her. She took a deep breath and called him. "Hey, babe," he answered cheerfully. "How was your night?" Jenna hesitated. How could she answer him? How could she pretend everything was fine when it felt like her whole world was unraveling? "It was good," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Just Catching up with Max, you know. She could hear the smile in his voice. That's great. I know how much he meant to you back in the day. I'm glad you're reconnecting. Jenna bit her lip, guilt washing over her. She couldn't tell him the truth. Not yet. Not now. She wasn't ready to face the consequences of her actions. I'll see you soon, she said, ending the call quickly. Later that day, Max texted her, asking if she wanted to meet again. Jenna felt a flutter in her chest as she read the message. She knew it wasn't just about catching up. The chemistry between them was undeniable. But what did it mean? Was it just a fleeting moment from their past, or was there something more? She stared at the screen, her thumb hovering over the keyboard. It would be so easy to meet him again, to explore where this thing between them could go. But she knew it would only complicate things. She had a husband, a life. Max was a temptation she couldn't afford to indulge in. But what if she didn't want to resist anymore? In the end, she sent a reply, "Let's meet at the cafe. I'll be there in an hour." The cafe was busy, with the usual hum of conversation and the smell of freshly brewed coffee filling the air. Jenna sat at a table by the window, nervously stirring her drink as she waited for Max. She couldn't help but wonder what was going through his mind. Was he just as conflicted as she was, or was this all part of some game? When he walked in, his gaze immediately found hers, and for a moment, the world seemed to fade away. He smiled, that same knowing smile from the night before, and walked over to her with an air of confidence that both comforted and unsettled her. "Hey," he said softly as he sat down across from her. "You look different. In a good way." Jenna couldn't help but smile, though it felt forced. "Thanks," she replied, looking down at her hands. She didn't know what to say. The tension between them was thick, almost suffocating. Max leaned forward, his voice low. "I've been thinking about last night. About us." Jenna's heart raced. She looked up, meeting his eyes, feeling the weight of his words. "I know you're married," Max continued. "But I can't help but feel like there's something between us, something that's been there all along. I'm not saying we need to figure everything out right now, but..." Jenna cut him off, her voice trembling. "Max, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what this means." He nodded, understanding. "I get it. I do. But I'm not going to lie to you. I want to see where this can go. I don't want to just let it slip away again." Jenna closed her eyes, her mind a whirl of confusion and desire. She wanted him, she knew she did. But she wasn't sure how to reconcile that with the life she had built with James. What did she want? What did she really want? "Max," she said, her voice shaking. "I don't know what I'm looking for. I don't know if this is the answer." Max reached across the table, his hand brushing hers gently. "Sometimes, Jenna, you have to take a risk. You have to step into the unknown to see what's really there." The days that followed felt like a blur. Jenna couldn't shake the weight of the choice she had made. Every time she saw James, she felt a knot tighten in her stomach. He was as kind and attentive as always, completely unaware of the internal war raging inside her. It felt as though they were living in parallel universes, he, wrapped up in the comfortable routine of their life, and she, caught in a dangerous dance between loyalty and temptation. Max's presence was a constant pull. They had met a few more times, their meetings becoming more intimate with each encounter. The connection between them had deepened, and though Jenna told herself it was just the nostalgia of youth reawakening, she couldn't ignore the chemistry that sparked between them every time they were together. She tried to convince herself it was just a phase, something fleeting, a brief escape from the routine. But deep down, she knew it was more than that. She was torn. She had never been one to cheat, and the guilt gnawed at her every time she kissed Max or even thought about him when she was with James. But with Max, she felt alive in a way she hadn't in years. He made her feel seen, desired, as though all the years of her marriage had made her invisible. One evening, she sat in the living room of her parents' house, scrolling through her phone aimlessly, when her phone buzzed again. It was a message from Max. "I miss you. I can't stop thinking about last night. We need to talk. This can't just be about the past. We are not kids anymore. I want more." Jenna read the message over and over, her heart pounding in her chest. What did she want? Was this just a midlife crisis, a temporary fix to an aching void she had ignored for so long? Or was this something real? She hadn't responded yet when the doorbell rang. She quickly tucked the phone away in her pocket as she went to answer it. She opened the door to find James standing there, holding a bouquet of flowers. "Hey," he said with a warm smile. "I thought you might like these." Jenna smiled, her heart sinking. How could she look him in the eye after everything? After what she had done? "Thanks, babe," she said, forcing her voice to sound light. "I love them." James stepped inside, setting the flowers on the counter before turning to her. "You've been distant lately," he said softly. "Is everything okay?" Jenna stiffened. He could always tell when something was wrong, even if she tried to hide it. Her mind raced, searching for an explanation, something that could cover the truth without hurting him. She couldn't bring herself to tell him. Not yet. "I'm just tired," she said, offering a weak smile. "It's been a long week." James looked at her for a moment, his brow furrowed in concern. "You sure? You don't seem like yourself." Jenna nodded quickly. "I'm fine." "Really?" He seemed to buy it, and after a moment of silence, he stepped closer, wrapping his arms around her. "I love you, Jenna. I just want to make sure you're okay." Those words she had heard so many times before, felt like a dagger to her heart. How could she have let things get this far? How could she have betrayed the man who loved her so completely? Later that night, after James had gone to bed, Jenna lay awake in the dark, staring at the ceiling. Her mind was a whirlwind. She thought about Max. She thought about the life she had with James. She thought about everything she was about to lose. And in the silence of the night, a part of her felt like she was suffocating, trapped between two worlds. The next day, she met Max again, this time in a secluded park on the outskirts of town. The air was cool, and the leaves had started to turn, signaling the coming of fall. Max was already there, sitting on a bench, his eyes scanning the horizon as if waiting for something, someone. As she approached him, their gazes locked, and for a moment, it felt like everything else faded away. She sat down next to him, the space between them charged with anticipation. "You've been quiet lately," Max said, his voice low. "Is everything all right?" Jenna took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She had to say something. She couldn't keep pretending. "James doesn't know," she whispered. "He doesn't know what's happening. And I don't know what I'm doing anymore. I feel like I'm living two lives." Max reached out, taking her hand in his. "You don't have to keep pretending, Jenna. I'm here, and I want you. We can figure this out together." Her heart raced as she met his eyes. There was no going back now. She had crossed the line, and now it felt like Max was pulling her further into the unknown. But was she ready to leave everything behind? Was she ready to walk away from her life with James, from the stability and the love they had built together? "Max," she said softly, her voice trembling. "I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I'm ready to hurt him. I'm not sure what I want anymore." Max leaned in closer, his breath warm against her ear. "I'm not asking you to make any decisions today. Just take a chance on us. We'll figure it out, one step at a time." Jenna closed her eyes, her heart heavy with indecision. Every instinct screamed at her to stop, to go back to the life she knew. But the pull between them, the connection that had ignited so many years ago, was undeniable. She had to make a choice. She looked at him, her voice barely a whisper. I don't know if I can walk away from my life with James, but I can't keep pretending like I don't feel something for you. Jenna returned home that evening, her mind a storm of conflicting emotions. She had never felt so lost, caught between the weight of her marriage and the undeniable pull toward Max. The days that followed felt like a slow unraveling of everything she had known, her internal conflict intensifying with every passing hour. James was still as loving as ever, still blind to the emotional distance that had quietly crept into their marriage. Jenna tried to go through the motions, to act as though everything was fine, but each smile felt forced, each touch hollow. Every conversation seemed to be a reminder of the life she was jeopardizing. Max had given her space after their meeting in the park, but Jenna knew it wasn't over. He had made it clear that he wanted more than a fleeting romance. He had fallen for her all over again, and she could feel herself slipping into that same dangerous territory. She had to make a decision. One evening, she called Max to meet. This time, it wasn't a secluded park or a quiet corner, it was a restaurant in the city, a place they both knew well from their younger days. It was a neutral ground, a place where they could talk without being watched, without the weight of the past hovering over them. Max arrived first, sitting in a booth near the window. When Jenna walked in, his eyes lit up, but there was something different about him. He wasn't the carefree boy she remembered from high school, he had grown into a man, his features harder, his demeanor more serious. Jenna, he greeted her softly, his voice carrying an intensity she hadn't noticed before. I've been waiting for you. Jenna slid into the seat across from him, her heart racing. She had been avoiding this conversation for too long, but now the moment had come. There was no more running. I've been thinking, she began, her voice steady but her hands trembling. I can't keep doing this. I can't keep living this double life. I owe it to James to be honest with him, and I owe it to myself to stop pretending that I can have both. Max's face hardened, his lips pressing into a thin line. So, what does that mean? Are you walking away from me? Jenna hesitated, the weight of his question pressing down on her chest. She had never felt more conflicted. But deep down, she knew what she had to do. I can't be with you, Max, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I've been running from the truth, but I know what I have with James is real. I love him, and I can't keep betraying him like this. I can't keep pretending that I don't have a family, a life, that I'm willing to throw away for something uncertain. Max's expression softened, but there was a sadness in his eyes. He had known this moment was coming. He had known that Jenna wasn't ready to walk away from her life, no matter how strong the connection between them was. I understand, he said quietly, his voice tinged with resignation. I never wanted to be the cause of your pain, Jenna. I wanted a chance. But if you're choosing him, I respect that. Jenna felt a lump form in her throat as she looked at him. She had hurt him, no matter how much she had tried to avoid it. But in the end, she knew it was the right choice. I'm sorry, she whispered. Max nodded, standing up from the table. Take care of yourself, Jenna. I hope you find what you're looking for. As he walked out of the restaurant, Jenna remained seated, her hands clenched in her lap. The reality of what she had done, the pain she had caused, the choices she had made, settled over her like a heavy fog. She had chosen to repair her marriage, but at what cost? The days that followed were a blur of guilt and reflection. Jenna told James everything, the affair, the emotional betrayal, the doubts she had about their relationship. It was the hardest thing she had ever done, and for the first time in a long while, she felt truly vulnerable. James was devastated. He had never expected this, never thought for a second that Jenna could betray him like this. But despite the pain, he didn't walk away. He chose to forgive her, though the road ahead would be long and filled with uncertainty. They sought therapy together, working through their issues, rebuilding trust. It wasn't easy, and there were days when Jenna wondered if they would make it, but she was determined to try. As for Max, she never saw him again. The finality of their last conversation hung in the air between them, and though she knew she had made the right choice, part of her would always wonder what might have been. Life, as it often does, moved on. Jenna and James worked through the aftermath of the affair, learning to communicate better, to be more open with each other. There were still moments of doubt, moments when Jenna felt the weight of her choices, but with time, they found a new rhythm. The love they shared had been tested, but it wasn't broken. Jenna had learned a painful lesson about the fragility of trust, the complexity of love, and the consequences of the choices we make. The past was a place she couldn't return to, but the future was still hers to shape. And as she lay in bed one night, listening to the steady sound of James's breathing beside her, Jenna realized that maybe, just maybe, she was finally at peace.